All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Christine May, and I am welcoming you today as an uninvited guest on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. As curator here at the gallery, and on behalf of our board of directors and staff, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we operate, gather, and benefit every day on the land of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. This afternoon, we are pleased to have Shannon Bool joining us to speak about her artistic practice and our current exhibition of her work titled The Shape of Obus. The Shape of Obus highlights her recent research on the figure of Le Corbusier, a Swiss-French pioneer of modern architecture. Shannon's work focuses on a series of erotic drawings that he made in Algeria during the 1930s and the interior spaces he designed for his apartment in Paris and for the Villa Savoy. Shannon's recent practice takes on many forms, including tapestries, silk paintings, collages, sculpture, and photograms. Her work gravitates around a central theme, which is a critique of modernism through unconventional material processes, combined with her own interpretation of psychoanalytical concepts. So thank you for joining us, Shannon. And before I turn it over to Shannon, I would like to remind everyone to save your questions for the end of the talk during the 15-minute Q&A period. And at that time, you can type your questions into the chat bar, and we will do our best to address them in a timely manner. And it's also important to note that this is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our website. So thank you and enjoy the talk. And Shannon, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine, and nice to see you. And I'm here at nighttime in Berlin in Germany, and I'm glad that something good came out of the pandemic, which is allowing us to use different forms of communication to disseminate information and gather and have artist talks, which we didn't do before. So I'm happy to join everyone. And this is also a very special talk for me because this project began at the Musée d'Art de Joliette in Quebec in 2018. And the show has traveled in Germany, in Braunschweig, in Paris, and in Prince Edward Island, Kingston, and now Kelowna in British Columbia, where I'm from. I'm from Vancouver Island. I've lived in Germany for over 20 years, but I'm Canadian, of course. And so I'm really happy at this circle that the show was made. And what I'll do tonight is speak about the show in its essence and some of the research and ideas that led me to the work. So I'll just get started. And to give an outline of my work, I think, Christine, you gave a good overview. I'm working with a lot of different mediums. I have a background in painting. I'm also a professor of painting at the Art Academy of Mines in Germany. So I would say that painting is my mother tongue, but I'm very promiscuous with mediums, and I really work with the medium which serves the investigation I'm making in form or idea. So the Shape of Obus is an investigation that came to me when I started to look closely at architectural spaces mostly. But it also came from a long-term analysis of looking at Orientalism and the idea of the harem, which was a subject I'd looked at very intensively in a body of work 10 years earlier in my first group of institutional shows in Germany and France in 2010 and 11. They were actually called the inverted harem, and I was interested in the history of painting and the depiction of the Orient, the Western gaze, the male gaze, and I was really looking specifically at those concepts. So that opened up in a long-term view. As an artist, I think our views change over time, or they broaden, and you focus on different things. So from my intense look at painting and harem and textiles, I moved to modernism and architecture in a very broad sense with a lot of different projects. In this specific body of work, I was really struck by the project Obus from Le Corbusier, and it led me to a lot of connections between contemporary culture and the history of further painting, as in Picasso. And you'll see these references coming up in the work. Another thing that I can say is that my work is, I wouldn't say it's research based. I do a lot of reading and research in my work, but when I put the work together, it's very intuitive. It's based on an idea of something that makes sense that I don't quite understand. I'm not taking a specific point of view. I'm taking multiple point of views, I think, and I'm trying to figure something out. And often the analysis comes after the work. So let's look at some work. I guess that's what you came for. So The Shape of Obus is the title of the show. And the word obus is a plan that Le Corbusier made that he never realized. It's one of the first incidences of massive urban planning as a genre. He began this project in the beginning of the 1920s, I believe, and he finished it in 1933, and it was never realized. And the interesting thing about the Plan Obus is that it gave space for the idea of mass urban planning, and Le Corbusier did several other proposals uninvited. He was on a mission to build an urban, like a large urban project, which finally worked when he did the Chandigarh project in India. So for me, this project is very interesting because it's in its essence, it's an imaginary space, and it's a huge field of projection. This is a photo of a physical model of the Plan Obus. It was a plan to restructure the city of Algiers and to build a superhighway that would cut through the Kasbah and specific housing units. It was considered by Corbu to be a very almost post-colonial project, but in its essence, it was very Eurocentric and very based on the Western gaze. And I'll get into that when I show you some of the work and some of the working processes. Those were things that I was looking at. This is another photo. I'm just showing a couple of photos of resources of the very like basic vocabulary of the things that I was looking at. This is an aerial plan from Le Corbusier, from where you can see the superhighway and one of the housing units. But there is also several suburbs designed and different plans that were made. And this is a drawing by Le Corbusier that the drawings are housed in the Foundation Corbusier in Paris, and they've been published. Not all of them have been published. Some of them are highly erotic, and those ones didn't make it into the books. Those are some of the ones that I was really looking at. And this postcard, this drawing is based on an Orientalist postcard. So one of the things that was occurring in the time of the Plan Obus being developed is the trade of erotic postcards representing Northern African women. That was a genre that I'll show you in other works coming up. But there was a convention of postcards being produced by Western photography studios like Lemke and Lennart, German Swiss photographers who were living in, I believe they were in Tunis, and they would have a studio where they would photograph women in Orientalist poses, everything based on fantasy, a Eurocentric fantasy of what women would be doing or look like or portray. And then they were highly distributed in Europe. So it was a very like a commodity, easily attained postcards. So Le Corbusier had a collection of postcards that he traced, and he also made drawings himself. So this is something I found very fascinating that was also occurring at the same time that he was making the plans. So you see the connection of the the fantasy or the projection of the female body, and how that affects the architectural gaze. But you also see the problematics of and the implication of this gaze in the architecture itself. So this is the first work that I want to show that is also in the exhibition in Kelowna. It's a tapestry. It's a jacquard tapestry, which means that it's made with a computer, working with a loom. I work with weavers in Belgium, and then I often hand embroider some of the details on the finished tapestry. And this one is called Ued Ochaya, which is the name of the plan that the tapestry is based on. So it's actually a scan of one of the Obus plans that I inverted so it would look like a blueprint, giving it this color, and superimposed onto the plan and woven into the plan itself is one of Le Corbusier's drawings, one of the more secret drawings of women engaged in as 69. And this was actually from a session where he hired two models and in Algiers, and they were in a flat, and he was doing live drawings of them. And these drawing sessions also became the kernels of natural cubism. If you look at Le Corbusier's painting practice, where he has very highly abstracted figures, they all evolved from these early drawings. You can trace the lineage of them. And also another thing that I'll get into in the works is that Le Corbusier and Picasso were friends, and Picasso was influenced by Le Corbusier's Algerian research, travels, and drawings. And this also most definitely influenced Picasso's his impulses of the Le Femme d'Alger, this giant painting series also coming up, that I can show you how I was looking at that. So anyways, I was interested in this work in really interweaving the implication of the drawing, the bodies, and the plans, because plans are very behavioral, they're very directive, they're very it's a model for how to live and how to behave and how to move in a space. So somehow I wanted the female bodies to take over the space. And the drawings themselves are veiled with weavings, and these are weavings that not directly, they're referencing weavings that I found in the Paris villas of Le Corbusier, not only the Villa Savoie, but Villa La Roche, and he has several other commissions that he was making in the 1930s, which almost all have or had Algerian carpets in them. So he was also an avid collector. So there's something about the domestic space and this transfer of East and West and veiling of the figures. And just I think it's 2 meters 70 by 180. I don't have any sizes or titles in the slides. And I'm speaking centimeters, so probably no one understands me anyways. Here's some details where you can see I did hand embroidery. Also, handwork is a really important aspect of my working process. And the gendering of materiality. So I'm taking architectural information and translating it through weaving, which is generally seen as a feminine medium, although tapestry making not so much, but in general embroidery especially. But I'm also interested in the gendering of material processes. Another reason why I'm working with tapestries. Some more details. This is the second tapestry in the series, and these two were shown together. And this is Maison Loc Pontif. I always can't pronounce the middle word, but it's the name of the village in the suburb of Algiers where the plans take place. And here, one of the conventions of Corbu's drawings of Northern African women is he almost always drew two women together, fighting, having sex, chasing a ball, doing absurd things or squished together. So you see already like the kind of dehumanization of the female forms and the way they're handled, like raw materials in the drawings. So in this particular tapestry, I referenced two women who were stacked into each other from one of the new drawings. And this particular plan has a lot to do with the gaze. So you have two houses which were intended to be apartments for French inhabitants of Algiers. And you can see the modular man, which is Le Corbusier's measurement of proportions, a male proportional person, has the gaze going through the building, and that's to represent that everyone would have a view of the ocean who was having a flat. But in my work, the gaze ends up going over the bodies and kind of disrupting the body forms, or the monster bodies. I think there's something monstrous about them. And so I also embroidered these details to really bring them out into the foreground of the piece. And then this is another body of work that's also in Kelowna. It's called The Bombshells. And a thing that I would like to say about the title, and another reason why the title is called The Shape of Obus, is that the word obus in French means shell, as in a seashell, but it also can mean a bombshell. And so this body of work I called The Bombshells because they directly reference Orientalist postcards that were directly from these studios such as Leimert and Lenhart, or other studios that were operating in Northern Africa. And I wanted to look at the relationship between the architectural plans and the postcards themselves. And this body of work, so I can show you. Also, the setting of the work mimics some of the conventions of the villas, of the Parisian villas of Le Corbusier, so I'm mimicking the color scheme, and also the lamps, these lamps which are just metal pipes lacquered with light bulbs attached to them, which I also really love these lamps. But they're this is something that Le Corbusier invented for his villas, and this is a modernist like hack of just saying, like, this is really pure function, and it's all you need. You need the lamp to be attached to a metal structure that will direct the light, and no frills. And this is and revealing the structures themselves. So for me, it's important that these works are shown in an intimate setting, because they're quite contentious and not easy works, and they also expose some of the violence that I wanted to bring to the foreground in making them. So these are photograms. Here's that was a photo from one of the exhibitions in Canada. This is from the Kunstverein in Braunschweig when I showed the works in Germany. So it's more of a domestic setting. And yeah, so they've been shown in a few different intimate rooms. And the color is from Villeroy Roche. It's a fleshy color from the palette of Corbu. And so this body of work also takes me back to my interest in the harem, and this origin of representing women through the male gaze in kind of, I would say, very passive and very very passive poses, like the odalisque we know from Ingres, and from this is from Delacroix, from Orientalism, women lazing in surroundings, and women doing activities for the male gaze. And so in this case, you can see I superimposed the 3D plan of the obus directly over the figure. These works were basically made from having the plans in my studio for, I think, almost a year, and having the research of the postcards. And at one point I realized that they fit together like a lock and a key. And I knew that the works would be contentious, and also I'm implicated in the works as a Western woman because they're representing Northern African women, but they're also representing women. So from my feminist viewpoint, it was really important for me to bring them out, also to show the violence of modernism and the violence of this perspective. So there's something exposing them, but there's also an aspect of them being veiled through the architecture, which also acts as a veil on top of the nakedness of them. So here's a few examples of the bombshells with different plans, obus plans, and it's a type of photogram or a contact print where I had negatives made of both images and collaged together physically, and then lit in a dark room. So they're handmade. So there's also a haptic of the way they're put together. And taking us to the language of Orientalism and painting, and works that become a bit more playful. The Shape of Obus show, it began in Joliet with the works that I've showed you until now, but the works evolved over time, and the body of work was kind of rounded up, and new works were made because the show's been going for, I think, 5 years now, Christine, right? Yeah. So I think in 2019 and 20, I started looking more directly. I kind of incorporated Picasso into the Corbusier narrative, because I was looking really, really closely at Le Femme d'Alger. And so when Picasso made the paintings, Le Femme d'Alger, which is a few paintings, and one of them was actually the most expensive painting sold at auction. It had a record for a few years, I think until 2017 or something. So it's very important, very revered painting. And what I didn't know was that Picasso made a series of drawings over several months of Le Femme d'Alger, where he reformed the women in this harem setting. And for me, it was really interesting to see how the forms of the women became more and more deconstructed over time and more dehumanized in a way, which is also an aspect of Cubism and changing the perspective, mechanizing the perspective. I just thought there were so many parallels in the sensibility of this is a very modernist sensibility to kind of kaleidoscopize the gaze, make it more complex, but also what was happening with the figures. And then I had this particular sketch from like the month of December in 1954, and it was reminding me of something. This is also how I can maybe describe my working process a little bit, because I don't, as I said, I don't research and sit down and say, oh, this is what I'm interested in doing, and then I make a work. I have materials and references, and they kind of stay in my head, or they're hanging around the studio for a long time. So in this case, I had the Picasso, this particular sketch, and then I realized that the bottoms of the Picasso figures fit exactly the Kim Kardashian bottom from Paper Magazine. And then that led me to all of these questions about the evolution of the gaze and the evolution of body morphing, and a lot of other, questions of body authorship, and also this maybe more ambivalent relationship to gaze, being gazed, participating, playing. So I guess my perspective also before is ambivalent. I'm not morally trying to fix things. I'm exposing problems, and I'm weaving through aesthetic systems. And so I thought it was really interesting here to see this lineage between Delacroix and Paper Magazine 2014. And so this culminated in a tapestry, which started off as a photo work in the Joliet show. It was a painted photograph, and then that work transformed into, not transformed. I decided to make a jacquard tapestry out of it. And so what I did was I made the setting in the Villa Savoie by Le Corbusier, which is one of his Paris villas, which has a very strange open bathroom, which is in the middle of one of the other rooms. So if you walk in, there's a wall, but there aren't any doors. It has an open space. And the bathtub even has this chaise lounge out of tiles. So someone can lounge there. I mean, it's really like a harem. It's like a modernist harem setting. So I put 3 of the figures from this particular Femme d'Alger sketch where the bottom fit perfectly into it. And I made a harem scene. It's called Women in Their Apartment. Here's a detail where you can see. This is a difficult thing in lectures or photos, because you can't get the haptic of the weaving, or you can't see the materiality very well, because the weaving, it just goes back into the photographic reading. But you can see here some of the irregularities of the weave, or some of the roughness of it. And there's also a lot of embroidery involved afterwards. And another thing that this is something that I added to the show in Braunschweig in Germany. When I visited the Villa Savoie in Paris, I think the Foundation Corbusier was doing a collaboration with the furniture company Tolex. There were several Tolex objects. Tolex is a furniture designer who works with zinced metal. And the designer Xavier Pochard in the 1920s made this very famous chair, the Tolex chair. I don't remember what number it is, but it's ubiquitous, and it's been hacked by every chair making company in the world. So basically, like 40% of outdoor cafes have these chairs, but the original ones are from the 1920s. And so when I visited the Villa Savoie, they had a lot of the Tolex furniture in the Le Corbusier colors in the villa. And this scene here is directly across from the harem bathroom. So I couldn't resist taking a picture. And then when I was making the show in Braunschweig and doing the production of Women in Their Apartment, I decided to make an expanded Tolex chair, and the expanded Tolex chairs are also in Kelowna, and I'm really happy that they're traveling around and people can use them, that there's some functionality in the exhibition. But I made the chairs basically, I altered them so they could fit a really wide bottom with a really narrow waist. So I expanded the form to respond to this reading of physical space. And I did that by taking original Tolex chairs and cutting the seat off, and then casting it in a gummy material, and then stretching it, and then casting that in bronze, and then re-sculpting them back together, and then painting them in the Villa Savoie colors, which I also used in some of the renditions of the exhibitions. And also in Kelowna, we have some of the color scheme in the space. So you can see it from the top, you can get a better idea of the form being altered. You can't see it so much when they're photographed from straight on. And then there's the two pink ones. And another body of work that is also in Kelowna that I'd like to talk about is a series of embroideries that I made. And this also came, it began with one or two embroideries in Joliet, but then it became a bigger body of work where I was looking at architectural plans as really, the master narrative. It's kind of like the Bible of the space and the moment of the space and the conception of the space. And I wanted to work with these plans, and also I took very iconic plans. It's not just Le Corbusier. It's all of my modernist giants that I love and hate, like Adolf Loos, and Carlo Molino and Mies van der Rohe. I took plans that I found interesting on a visual level, but also because they were of specific buildings. And then I worked embroidery systems into them in a very experimental way. For example, one that it's fun to talk about is the Farnsworth House from Mies van der Rohe, which is a private home that he made for Edith Farnsworth outside of Chicago in the 1950s. And for this particular plan, an example of the decision making of like what is embroidered and how is it embroidered. It's this, first of all, it's a scan of the plan, and then it's inverted and silk screened onto silk, and the silk is hand dyed to have a similar color to a blueprint. And then the silk is stretched on a stretcher. And then I was working with my studio team. There were 2 or 3 or 4 of us at any given time, and we would talk about what we were embroidering, and we were learning stitches together. And in making this particular embroidery, I was working on a Carlo Molino embroidery in Sicily, and Carlo Molino is one of my, he's a very iconic Italian modernist architect, but also really bizarre, really creative, really problematic. And so I was working on the Carlo Molino, and he was also involved in surrealism, really great with color. So I was really riffing off of the Carlo Molino sensibility. And one of my assistants, Katie, was working on the Farnsworth House, but we started playing tic-tac-toe, where we were prescribing each other stitches, or I would say, no, there's going to be an X there and an O there. So we had this communication going in the studio. And I like this level of seriousness and care, but it was also completely absurd to be taking these iconic legacy houses and then using them for bitching and stitching. Basically, this one I really love. This is Haus Müller from Adolf Loos, which is one of my favorite buildings that I've ever also been to. So it's very delicate with single thread. This is a very early modernist villa from, I think, 1903 or something like that. And the last body of work I'd like to talk about is the silk paintings, which are also in Kelowna. And this is a body of work that also was touring with the exhibition. And another part of my practice is painting with silk, with very, very thin chiffon. And I started to work in a way where I was stretching the chiffon over mirrors. I don't know, maybe 8 years ago or something. I realized that the transparency of the chiffon over a mirror, that the mirror would reflect the space. And then there would be a huge disconnect between the body and the space and the mirror. And then I started to work directly with architectural forms. And I was looking at going from Le Corbusier, I started to look at brutalism and specific building facades and grids and structural forms. But then the works are made using also very low technique. It's painting, but it's batik. So it's all done with wax resist and then different layers of different types of paint. And then the wax is ironed out. And at the end, there's the painting emerges. And so I think these paintings were also a great addition to the exhibition because they really work with the body, and the body really tries to negotiate the space of the painting. It's facades or areas, but it's blocks of material that are represented in grids in very minimal colors. And then they reflect in the space. And that's something it's a pity in the photos because the mirror, you can't represent the mirroring in photos. So I really at some point need to make a video documentation to show what happens when you're in the space with the paintings. And the photo that I showed, this was from the exhibition also in Braunschweig, where I thought it would be interesting to show this photo because they had a room where you weren't able to use the walls because it's under heritage protection. So whenever artists show in this room, they have this difficult process of trying to find what to do with it. And so I ended up hanging the paintings in the windows, which I covered with boards and painted in a similar color to the walls. And so they were kind of like, because they are like windows in themselves, I thought it was interesting that they took the window spaces. And these are paintings from the very first show in Joliet. And I can show some details. So you can see they're also very analytical and very lineal, but they're quite messy and painterly if you see them up close. As also with the tapestries, I think when you come close and you meet them, they have a lot of materiality that you don't see in photos. You can see a little bit here that the wax is not made from a computer. Ah, and this is another work that traveled with the show. And there's also a rendition of it in Kelowna that was painted very expertly by Dylan from your team. He did an amazing job. And yeah, so another quote to maybe sort of end the talk, but uh, another look into the space of the show. This painting is a very photographic representation of the Le Corbusier house, also with Jeanneret. He did it with his cousin together, with Edouard Jeanneret, in the Weissenhof estate in Stuttgart, where you have small module homes of different modernist masters. It's an amazing place. But there's one point in the Le Corbusier building where the colors meet at a stairwell, and it looks like a flattened painting because of the dynamic of the colors. It's really it's an amazing moment. So I made a wall mural out of that image, and it went to the different exhibitions, and it has a light sticking out of it with with one of the metal rods. So it's a very showing how the space dissolves and how the body dissolves in the space, which is one of the things I actually love about modernism. So there's a lot of problems with the body. There's a lot of yeah, advances with the body. I'll finish the talk with this last photo. This is a different version of the one that's in the exhibition. but this is Le Corbusier's bedroom, and the work is called N24 with Caspa extensions. So at the same time that the Obus plan was being made, Le Corbusier was designing his own flat in Paris. It actually just reopened to the public, I think 2 years ago. And I had the photo of this. This is his bedroom, which is really like a cave. It's not, it doesn't make any sense when you look at it. It's a fantasy cave. It's a man cave. And one of the things that historians talk about in like dissertations is that there's a bidet in the middle of the room. So that's another aspect of modernism, that sanitation is exposed, the body is clean. We're transparent about that. The bed is on stilts, so Le Corbusier and his wife can look out the window, but his wife had to use a little ladder to get up to it. And so what I did in this work is, if you can see to the left, where the stairs are, that is actually, it should be a door that goes to a bathtub, but I collaged a view inside the Caspa. And then on the right side, where there was a mirror, I collaged another view inside to a sort of labyrinth of the Caspa. And so for me, it was, this was a kind of comment on the imagination, also like the Western gaze, accessing subconsciously the space of the other. So I can end it here, Christine. I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. The images that you compiled together for your presentation were so helpful in learning about your process and the exhibition in general. So thank you. Now is a great time for everybody to enter your questions into the chat, and I will read them aloud. And while we're waiting for that, in the meantime, Shannon, would you mind? I mean, you talked about how you kind of started as a painter, and you've moved on to practicing in different mediums and tapestry and embroidery. And do you have a direction at the moment? Are you continuing to experiment with different mediums? And what are you working on now?
Yeah. I'm still working presently, right at the moment. I started working with ceramic tiles, and I'm doing 2 big public art projects, looking at images that have been reduced down to very, very few pixels, like you see in Minecraft,
Yeah.
or and so I'm looking very carefully at glaze development and how pictures are constructed, but very minimal pictures, only pictures of walls or curtains, so a very limited representation. And so those are some things that I'm working on now. And I'm also working more with tapestries and textiles.
Yeah.
And the embroidery has become more heavy in them. And there's more direct references to architecture. So
Okay.
yeah, that's what's going on now.
That's exciting. And is your public art project, will that include those ceramic tiles?
Yes.
Is that part of
Yeah.
that? Okay, you'll have to send photos along when that's done. That
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
It's for the opera in Cologne, and it's actually it's a post Bauhaus architect, Arthur Ripon, and it's a very famous giant opera building. And I'm doing 2 big mosaics of pixelated curtains.
Oh, fantastic.
In 31 exact colors that are being produced right now.
Wow.
They're not easy to produce in
No, I
glaze.
imagine not. Yeah, that's impressive. And another question I'll ask, we have someone raising their hand, and I'm gonna allow them to join here and ask a question. Diana. Diana,
me?
yeah, there we go.
Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm here. I just was wanting to say I appreciate all the different levels of exploration you're doing with all the different sort of women and history and architecture. It's really interesting. Anyway, that was my comment, and just wondering how maybe
you.
you find the different material to explore. That would be my question. How do you discover them in the process?
This is, yeah, I think I experienced them. So most of the architecture that I got interested in was from starting to visit the sites and then experiencing them with my body, basically.
Oh, neat.
And yeah, so I started to look at different buildings, and then you read about them. But then I guess for me, I have a background in painting and art history and looking at paintings in museums, looking at photography in museums, but mostly the history of painting is what. And so when I see architecture or I learn about modernism, I like to bring 2 or 3 different things together usually. I think
Yeah,
that's
it's
how.
really cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Diana.
Thanks.
Let's see. I saw another hand that's disappeared, but feel free to anyone to raise your hand and I'll add you to the talk. Shannon, you were talking about some of your major influences, obviously, for your work in this exhibition. Picasso, Carlo Mellino, who I've written down, who I'm definitely Googling after this. Who are you researching or kind of inspired by at the moment, if you can share a little bit about that?
At the moment, what am I looking at? I mean, I'm looking at psychoanalytic theory more. I'm picking up things that I put down 10 years ago and then starting to read them again. But I'm looking at really contemporary architecture. I just made a body of work where I was looking at the architectural design for a Dior exhibition in Denver, which I just became obsessed with this this specific design, and it's by Shigemoto by Oma Architects.
Okay.
But I mean, I always am looking at different painters and different things. Also working with my students, we go to museums all the time, and we go visit buildings, and I'm just usually really excited by new painters or historical things I discover or contemporary things I discover. Yeah, it's always unfolding.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you're in a good place in Berlin to be able to visit so many incredible museums and galleries. So I'm sure inspiration is easy to find. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. We will have this recorded talk uploaded to our website probably early next week. So for anybody who didn't come, we can point them in that direction. We'll post the link. So thank you very much for everyone who joined us today. And thank you so much, Shannon. I know it's late where you are, but that was incredible to have your voice and your talk. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you so much for the great work on the exhibition and the great work from your team.
It was our collective pleasure. We loved working on it, and it's great to see our visitors enjoying it. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.